The French Revolution would probably have never happened if it weren't for two things: food and taxes. Food is simple enough to understand. Leading up to the revolution, hailstorms destroyed wheat crops, raising the price of bread, a staple for the majority of France. But to understand taxes, you need to know about the social structures of France. The people were divided into three classes, or estates. The first estate, the clergy; the second estate, the nobles; and the third estate, everyone else. The third estate paid 100% of the taxes, and looking at population alone, this seemed pretty reasonable. But looking at the money shows a different story. The third estate only had a little over half the wealth, which wasn't very much once divided. The first and second estate could put 100% of their untaxed income towards food, while the third estate could possibly spend an entire month's work on a single loaf of bread. After financing the American Revolution, thanks France ended up declaring bankruptcy. In order to solve financial troubles, King Louis called a meeting of the Estates General, France's version of Parliament, which hadn't met since 1614. The first and second estate each brought 300 people, and the third estate showed up with 600. Understandably, they didn't agree on anything, and a fed-up third estate declared that it would form its own national assembly. While on break, the king locked out the third estate and said something to the effect of, "How are you going to assemble if you have no room in which to assemble?" The king seemed to forget that there was more than one room in France. The third estate moved to a nearby tennis court, where they swore the tennis court oath to try and improve the country. Sometime later, riots arose in Paris due to lack of food. Troops were sent in to deal with it, and even though it had nothing to do with the revolution, the revolutionaries took it as an attack. They stormed the Bastille prison, with the front of freeing prisoners. Only 7 were in the prison at the time. The real intent was to gain weapons. On August 4th, the king's regime fell, and on the 16th, the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen was brought about, a document sort of like our Constitution. It guaranteed life, liberty, and equality to all of France's citizens, none of which it did a very good job at protecting. At this time, rumors of grain were being hoarded at the palace came about, and a group of armed peasant women stormed the palace. The royal family escaped, but the National Assembly moved them to Paris. It should be noted that the majority of the revolutionaries did not want to abolish the monarchy. They simply wanted a constitutional monarchy. Only the extremists called for a republic. During a rally of these extremists, the National Assembly opened fire on the gathering. The revolutionaries were now killing each other. Due to a shortage of food, France decided to attack Austria to try and steal grain. This didn't work too well, and Prussia joined Austria and thoroughly beat France. And since King Louis was seen as a supporter of Prussia, the National Assembly sentenced him to death by guillotine. This started the Terror, a time period in which the Committee of Public Safety began to execute anyone who disagreed with the revolution, and sometimes even those who did agree. This ended when Maximilien Robespierre, the leader of the committee, was sentenced to death. During the Terror, France abolished Christianity and rearranged time itself. Days contained 10 hours, with each hour having 100 minutes. Weeks were 10 days long. After Robespierre's death, there were many coups and counter-coups, as many attempted to gain control for themselves. The last of these was led by Napoleon Bonaparte, who then declared himself Consul of France.